Welcome to the MEIOU and Taxes mod showcase for EU5. My name is Malorn, and we are going to be discussing how MNT is progressing for EU5, the challenges and opportunities of working on a new game, as well as outlining our plans for the mod in EU5 and the philosophy behind MEIOU and Taxes. First, a little history. MEIOU and Taxes began as the union of two of the largest EU3 modding teams, creating MNT for EU4. The team modded EU4 from the moment EU4 was released, going through three major versions.
Hello everyone, I am Mapper and I will be talking a bit about MEIOU and Taxes v3.0, the big overhaul mod for EU4 that was known for introducing, amongst other things, population on a per province basis, but also a fully fledged supply and demand economy, which basically listened to the Economy 101 rules, a fully modeled omnidirectional trade system replacing EU4's vanilla trade, which was apart from not really being real, also not only directional, and a much deeper political system in the mod in which the player navigated their nation, basically from a medieval to a modern state, depending a bit on where you started. To make this all possible, the MEIOU and Taxes team, amongst other things, kind of rewrote variables into a key system, uploaded in our mod hundreds of years of pre-run simulation, which was done on a developer PC, being a few hundred MBs of raw text files in events to load every time a new game in the mod was started, which took a few minutes. It was fun, it is still fun, rather deep in a simulationist way, but also a bit heavy on performance and, to be honest, quite hard to maintain and get into its code. Before dwelling too much on MNT for EU4, we are here, of course, to talk about MNT for EU5. So, with the launch of Europa Universalis 5, we knew right from the start that with the newer version of the Clausewitz engine and the fundamentally different base game, we had to start modding anew from scratch. Porting over MEIOU and Taxes v3.0 would be redundant. Many things we had added to EU4, such as population and real trade, were already present in the base game of EU5. So for us, this makes modding EU5 a very different endeavor than EU4. There is much less we want to rewrite, and potentially it is far easier to mod EU5 into a deep simulation game. Naturally, we still have plenty of things we'd like to change, but we agreed in the team that going slowly, tweaking and changing systems without fighting the base game too much would be the best route. So when it released, we all agreed to play the game quite a bit, find possible things we could tweak, and add them one by one as changes to a new mod that would gradually grow over time in both depth and scope.
MEIOU and Taxes has, for more than 10 years now, been a mod about depth of simulation. Therefore, the first question must be answered: what is deep simulation? Deep simulation strives to create a game that is more interconnected, a more realistic system to produce more realistic outcomes. We want to bring the game closer to reflecting the political, geographical, and economic realities that actual nations or regions faced in history. When this is done correctly, the game will, without the need for specific events, reproduce the flow of history. Of course, this is an ideal, and all ideals cannot be fully realized. But this concept of deep simulation is a guiding principle for MEIOU and Taxes. To provide an example, the team has already stripped out the RGO system, replacing these basic goods with buildings that produce them. This means that locations are not limited to producing a single primary good, and that all locations need not be equal in how they produce those goods. One location might, for example, produce salt via mining, whereas another might collect salt from the ocean. These, of course, are very different processes. A mine would require tools and lumber for bracing, whereas salt flats might be less productive, but also require few input goods apart from labor. This also allows us to introduce new methods of exploitation as technology advances. A salt mine would benefit greatly from the introduction of gunpowder, whereas salt flats would have no use for explosives. The ability to utilize input goods, even in basic outputs, also allows for more complex economies, with industries that rely more on each other, meaning that nations are more interconnected. For example, in the base game, a blockade might be useful in cutting off raw materials to an enemy. But in MNT, a blockade might do far more economic damage. Let us say you have a powerful rival who relies on livestock imported from a third nation. You take the locations in the market which produce this livestock, and then you blockade your rival. In base EU5, he would have some dissatisfaction from not being able to meet his livestock demand, and that would be the end of it. In MEIOU and Taxes, this lack of livestock will mean that his farms, which use livestock to pull plows, will begin to switch to a less productive method, meaning his food supply is now in danger. But perhaps he has access to horses, which can be used instead of livestock, but horses are more expensive, so its profits will decrease. And perhaps next you will try to cut off his source of horses. This is just one very simple example of what deep simulation looks like, where significant gameplay changes can come from very realistic but somewhat indirect methods. And this example has even more depth to it, since this massive demand for livestock you created might be filled by other markets during your blockade, meaning that after your blockade ends, your profits will not return. The entire livestock market will be depressed. Having the economy more interconnected allows for far greater realism. Having many options for basic production also means the economy balances itself to a degree. If livestock is gone, perhaps horses. If no horses, then food production will continue, but using only manual labor. Not ideal for profits, but unlikely to end in famine. This means the player has far more agency beyond simple choices such as go to war or not go to war. It means that what you build is not just a matter of which button has the largest profit number next to it, but what kind of economy you're trying to create and how it will influence your nation going forward. Another excellent example of a simple yet profound change is mining. Since we have discarded the RGO model, it is entirely possible to have mines of different richness, where the same good is produced via different methods or in different quantities. We have also modeled the difficulty of mining, where each level of mine that you add costs more than the one before, as you dig even deeper. And the deeper you go, the more you pay. This is an upfront cost with great return, but an upfront cost can always be conquered, meaning your entire investment goes to another player. Population is another example where deep simulation can perform better than a more arcade approach. EU5's time period covers massive changes in the way people lived. Population growth and management should be a necessary part of the game, with supporting large populations both economically valuable but politically dangerous. Large populations produce and consume goods on a large scale. That much is present in the base game. But what about the political part? Having a large population which is producing and consuming goods means you need a large supply chain, and any large supply chain can be disrupted. In the vanilla game, this is a matter of adjusting your taxes. Unrest merely means a loss of income at worst. In M&T, however, this disruption goes further, since much more of your economy is interconnected without the free input of RGOs. And, of course, states are much more willing to exploit weakness. This might take the form of a civil war, of course, but it's also more likely to be more friendly, in the sense that a state might be happy to help you, for a price. Perhaps a privilege they've wanted, or a small concession involving location belonging to another nation that they've been wanting. Or perhaps a cultural minority that they'd prefer had less rights. Religions and cultures in M&T are far more durable, with conversion requiring significant effort and time. Unlike vanilla, the speed of conversion scales both upwards and downwards to the population size, meaning that sparse populations do not convert quickly, if at all. Many minorities will endure for hundreds of years, especially around the edges of your empire. Stability has also been made a much more important factor in the health of your nation, meaning that spending long times in negative stability is quite dangerous for most nations, making the process of removing privileges you have granted your estates more challenging. All of these factors come together to create a more challenging gameplay experience, especially for nations which are trying to expand. This means that to change history becomes an accomplishment rather than an inevitability. Since we are on the topic of expansion and wars, the military system has been an early focus for the team, with a great number of changes to how armies work. The first and most profound change is slowing the pace of army movement. Armies were not fast historically, especially in the early parts of the Europa Universalis time period. Slowing armies down has many gameplay benefits as well, including the need to maintain multiple armies rather than stacking them together in close proximity. If your army cannot rapidly move across your nation, then having only a single large army becomes a risk. It is easy, especially with a large nation, to end up with the enemy on multiple fronts, and slower armies that cannot merely bounce between both fronts, defending them both simultaneously. Retreats also become more time-consuming, meaning a retreat in battle can provide more time for your enemy to siege your locations, as your army slowly makes its way back to the front. But equally, it also allows you to play for distance, even if no forts block your opponent. Distance and time can be sacrificed as you wait for reinforcements. Allied armies are also much slower to arrive when a war begins, meaning that not all wars devolve into a clash of the full forces of both sides in every battle. By slowing the pace of land armies to a more realistic speed, control of the ocean also becomes more important. Since ships are much faster and do not need to contend with terrain, a war along a coastline can take place at a much faster pace. This slower speed of armies also interacts with terrain, making wars play out very differently in open terrain with good roads, where both sides are able to mass troops and maneuver quickly, therefore have large battles, whereas a war taking place in areas lacking roads, with many mountains and hills, will occur at a much slower pace, all else being equal, perhaps with much less territory changing hands. Naval levies have also been changed, with new naval levies being introduced that have actual combat value, representing how early naval warfare had far less distinction between military and civilian ships. This allows for much more interesting naval warfare in the early game, with levies playing a major role. War is also much more costly in MEIOU and Taxes, and not in the sense of upkeep or ducats. Looting has much more effect on prosperity and development. This means that trading sieges in a war may be a very bad idea, since your own lands will be damaged even if you completely win the war. It also means that land acquired via war is much less valuable initially, since that land will need time to recover from the damage you've done in the process of taking it. The goods costs of armies has also been increased, meaning that maintaining a powerful army requires a powerful economy, not merely lots of ducats. Given that any war disrupts trade and the interconnection of the economy, this can mean the ability to field armies at maximum strength can become difficult as the war continues. This and many other changes make war a more questionable decision rather than a comparison between whose armies is stronger at the moment. As wars go on longer, there is more opportunity for opportunistic rivals or neighbors to come in to start a second war while you're busy. All of this contributes to the difficulty but also the realism of the game, where war is not always the best solution. This brings us to the basic philosophy of the mod. There are historical outcomes and there are historical processes. An historical outcome is not a major focus of the mod, whereas the historical process is very important. The goal is that everything occurs in an historically plausible way, even if many things do not occur in the way that actual history did. Half of the fun of a Europe Universalis game, after all, is changing history. Errors should ultimately be historically plausible. It should make sense. It should not be one province conquers the world through this one fun exploit that admittedly was very exciting to discover, but it's not very exciting the second time. Ideally, you should understand why you were able to do something, and at least, to an extent, believe that that could have been possible. This is the goal of MEIOU and Taxes at its most fundamental level.
As Malorn mentioned, plausibility is our core goal. But why, one might ask? The answer is that this helps with immersion. Let me explain. So, if a game feels right, in a way that what is happening on screen makes sense to your brain, it is much easier to transport yourself with all your attention into our game world. Anything that feels wrong would break the illusion. Immersion, I would say, is the key to what makes MEIOU and Taxes fun to play. The digital world we are creating should feel alive and responsive, an alternative world of what could have been. Steering your nation through an alternative history that feels plausible is the focal point of where the fun in MEIOU and Taxes is located. No bombarding the player with dopamine-stimulating rewards, but the more gradual and slow-paced reward of steering your nation in a plausible way through the course of history.
So, what is the future going to look like? What other plans there are for the mod? Obviously, we are a little wary of making promises. Everything that has been discussed here are things that have already been done and which we know work. But there are a large number of new ideas and new possibilities that are exposed in the EU5 engine. The ability to modify the economy without having to fight it is very freeing. It will make many things possible that were not possible before. Ultimately, we hope to maintain our focus on historicity plausibility, and deep simulation. There's a lot of potential here. The EU5 is practically designed around principles that M&T embraced long before. Not having to fight the vanilla systems means that we can do much more. But it also means that we have to do less. We do not have to recreate whole systems. We do not have to make a trade system. We do not have to do economic systems. We have to adapt what exists. Adapt them to our priorities, adapt them to the vision that we have. Our goal for this mod is going to probably be less ambitious than version 3, simply because there's less work to be done. But hopefully that will also allow us to devote more time to things that would have been impossible prior. One of the major priorities of the new mod has been performance. M&T v3 for EU4 was a performance juggernaut. It used tremendous amounts of performance which simply doesn't exist to be used in EU5, which already is very challenging on most computers. So maintaining a lightweight mod, something that won't use more CPU cycles than the vanilla game, has been a priority, and so far has been something that has been done very successfully. Of course, who knows how the future goes, but we don't anticipate creating a mod that runs substantially slower than vanilla EU5.
What players can expect from us though, is that we keep on slowly tweaking and reworking vanilla systems to bring them more in line with our mod's philosophy. So less arcade, more simulation. As much as I'd love to tell you about our systems currently in development, I really do not wish to make any promises, as at the end of the day we are all volunteers working on this overhaul project as a hobby. As such, we cannot give timelines or guarantees that certain things will be developed at all. For those curious to what we've made so far, please give it a try. You can download it either from the Steam Workshop or our community Discord server. If any of you watching have any further questions for the M&T team, we can always be reached on our Discord, and furthermore, Malorn and I will also be interviewed by Lord Lambert as part of this modcon. Thank you for watching.